The morning sunlight drifted softly across the Logan estate, painting everything in that deceptive golden calm that precedes a storm. Hope Logan had woken early, restless. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the echo of her mother's laughter from some distant memory. She had intended only to find a few work documents before heading to Forrester Creations, a simple, ordinary task. But life in Los Angeles, and certainly life within the tangled webs of the Logan and Forrester families, rarely allowed anything to remain simple for long. The drawer was slightly jammed, as if it hadn't been opened in years. Hope tugged, and a thin cloud of dust lifted into the air. Inside, Brooke's desk was organized chaos. Folders labeled contracts, press releases, charity events, and beneath them, a single worn envelope, yellowed with age, its seal brittle but intact. It bore a hospital insignia and a faint, fading stamp dated close to Hope's birthday. At first, she thought nothing of it. Her mother had kept countless medical records, mementos, and old correspondence. But something about the envelope's weight, the careful way it was folded and hidden beneath papers, made her pause. Curiosity has always been both Hope's strength and her undoing. She hesitated only for a second before sliding the document free. Inside was a thin sheet of paper, creased in 4 neat folds, the ink smudged but still legible. Her eyes traced the words one by one, expecting something mundane, insurance paperwork, a medical bill, perhaps even an old test result of Brooke's. Instead, what she found ripped the world out from under her feet. DNA analysis. Sample 1, Hope Logan. Sample 2, Stephanie Forrester. Relationship, mother, daughter. At first, she laughed, a short, nervous sound that bounced unnaturally in the quiet room. It had to be a mistake, some elaborate joke, maybe a cruel prank from years past meant to stir up trouble between the Logans and the Forresters. But the more she stared, the harder it became to deny the details. The date of testing aligned perfectly with her birth year. The hospital name was authentic. Even the doctor's handwriting, the stamp of approval, the embossed Forrester medical insignia, it was all real. Her hands began to tremble. She dropped into Brooke's chair, the paper rustling like dry leaves in her grasp. Stephanie Forrester. The woman who had spent her life reminding Brooke, and, by extension, Hope, of their place, their sins, their supposed inferiority. Stephanie, who had called her mother a homewrecker, a destroyer, a moral disease that infected the Forrester family. Stephanie, who had died years ago, taking her venom and her secrets with her. How could that woman, unyielding, unfeeling, unforgiving, possibly be her mother? The room felt smaller. The walls seemed to tilt. Hope's thoughts scattered in every direction, memories collapsing into one another. Brooke's tearful stories about her difficult pregnancy. The endless arguments about morality and love. The way Stephanie had looked at her when she was little, not with affection, but with something that, in hindsight, seemed dangerously close to recognition. Hours later, Brooke found her still sitting there, the paper unfolded on the desk, her eyes hollow with disbelief. "Where did you get that?" Brooke's voice cracked the silence, sharp with panic. Hope looked up slowly. "It was in your drawer," she said softly. "I wasn't looking for this." Brooke's face drained of color. She took a step forward, then stopped, as if the air between them had become too thick to cross. "Hope," she began, her voice trembling, "that paper doesn't mean what you think it does." But Hope's voice had already found the strength her body lacked. "Then tell me what it means. Because it says that Stephanie Forrester is my biological mother. And if that's true, everything I've ever believed about you, about us, it's all a lie." For the first time in her life, Brooke Logan, legendary, resilient, manipulative when she needed to be, looked utterly broken. She reached for her daughter, but Hope recoiled. The silence between them felt ancient, heavy with the weight of decades. Then Brooke sank into the chair opposite her, her hands clasped together, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for you to find out this way." Hope's breath hitched. "So it's true?" Brooke nodded, tears spilling freely now. "Yes." But you need to understand, it wasn't supposed to be like this. When I got pregnant, I was overjoyed, rich, and I thought it was fate, that our love had created something good. But a few months before you were born, I lost the baby. Hope froze. Lost me? Brooke shook her head violently. Not you. The baby before you. The one I thought was you. I miscarried, and no one knew except Stephanie. She came to me after it happened, said she would handle it discreetly. I was devastated, terrified of losing Ridge, of losing everything I had built. Stephanie promised me she could protect the family name, that she could protect me. Hope's voice trembled. Protect you? From what? From scandal, Brooke said bitterly. From the story getting out that Ridge's wife had lost their child while he was halfway around the world. But what she did went beyond anything I could have imagined. The confession came out in waves, each one heavier than the last. Stephanie had orchestrated a deception so elaborate it could have only been fueled by vengeance. Around the same time Brooke miscarried, a baby girl had been born prematurely to Stephanie herself, a pregnancy she had concealed to protect the Forrester family's image. No one knew except her doctor. The infant was fragile but alive. When Stephanie discovered Brooke's tragedy, she saw her opportunity. She arranged for Brooke to recover at a private clinic and quietly swapped the babies, convincing Brooke that her child had survived while hers had died. Hope stared, unblinking. You're saying I'm Stephanie Forrester's daughter? Brooke nodded, sobbing now. I didn't know. Not at first. I raised you, loved you, believed you were mine. It wasn't until years later that I learned the truth, and by then it was too late. Stephanie came to me one night, after one of our countless fights. She told me everything. She said she'd done it to punish me, to remind me that even when I thought I'd won, everything I loved still belonged to her. The air felt like glass, sharp enough to cut. Hope pressed a hand to her chest, trying to breathe. You knew. All these years you knew, and you never told me? I couldn't. Brooke's voice broke. You were happy. You had a family. You had a life that didn't need another war. I thought I could bury it, that Stephanie would take the secret to her grave. And she did. But that piece of paper, she gestured helplessly toward the test. I never meant for you to see it. I kept it as proof that she'd gone too far, proof that I wasn't crazy. I was going to destroy it, but I couldn't let go. Hope turned away, her pulse roaring in her ears. The woman who had raised her, who had taught her about love and forgiveness, had built their entire life on deception. Every act of tenderness, every sacrifice, now felt tainted by the lie underneath. You let me believe I was yours, she whispered. You let me grow up hating the woman who was my real mother. Brooke reached for her again, but Hope stepped back. You are my daughter, Brooke pleaded. You still are. Biology doesn't change love. But Hope's tears were not of confusion. They were of betrayal. You didn't love me enough to tell me the truth. When she left the house that night, the rain had begun to fall, soft and relentless. She drove without direction, her mind an echo chamber of voices. The mother who wasn't her mother, the enemy who had been her mother, the child she had once been, lost in the crossfire of revenge and pride. The next morning, she went to Forrester Creations. The office was quiet, the lights low. Eric sat alone in the conference room, sketching something aimlessly. He looked up when Hope entered, his expression gentle but wary.
Hope, he said.
You look pale. What's wrong? She hesitated, then placed the DNA report on the table between them. Eric's eyes widened. Where did you get this? It was in Brooke's desk, she said quietly. I think you already know what it says. Eric's hands shook as he picked up the paper. I knew Stephanie was angry, he said slowly. But I didn't know this. My God, I didn't know she went this far. Would you have stopped her?
Hope asked.
Eric looked at her with something like sorrow. I'd like to think I would have. But Stephanie had her ways. She believed she was protecting the family, even when she was destroying it. For a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of their revelation hung between them, as immovable as the walls around them. Finally, Eric said softly, "She did love you, you know. In her way. She always had a strange tenderness for you. I thought it was guilt over how she treated Brooke. Maybe it was something deeper." Hope turned to the window, watching the city below shimmer in the late morning light. "How do you reconcile love and cruelty?" she asked. "How do you forgive someone who gave you life but took away your identity?" Eric sighed. "In this family, forgiveness isn't a straight line. It's a circle. We hurt, we forgive, and somehow, we keep finding each other again." But Hope wasn't sure she wanted the circle to continue. She left the office before anyone else arrived, walking past portraits of the Forrester legacy, Ridge, Stephanie, Eric, all smiling, immortalized in glass and memory. Their empire had always been built on perfection, but now she saw it for what it truly was, a house made of secrets, its beauty a facade painted over cracks too deep to seal. Days turned into weeks. Brooke tried to reach her, leaving messages that went unanswered. Ridge confronted Brooke privately, furious that she had hidden something of this magnitude. "Do you realize what this does to Hope?" he shouted. "To all of us? Stephanie's been dead for years, but she's still destroying us from the grave." Brooke broke down again. "I thought I was saving her from that destruction," she whispered. "I didn't want her to become part of it." But it was too late. When Hope finally returned, it was not to forgive, but to confront. She stood before her mother with the same calm, deliberate grace Stephanie once wielded like a weapon. "I've spent my life trying to be the peacemaker," she said. "The one who healed what others broke. But how do I heal this? How do I make peace with being someone else's revenge?" Brooke's tears fell silently. "You're not revenge, Hope. You're the best thing that ever came from any of us." Hope looked away, her voice barely audible. "Then why do I feel like I was never meant to exist?" In the end, she walked out again, not in anger this time, but in clarity. She understood now why Stephanie had always hated her mother, because she had given Hope the one thing Stephanie could never control, love without condition. And she understood Brooke, too, the woman who had tried to rewrite fate out of fear and guilt. Both had loved her, both had wronged her, and both were part of the story she could no longer escape. That night, Hope stood alone at Stephanie's grave, the wind whispering through the trees. She traced her fingers over the carved name, feeling a strange mix of rage and longing. "You won," she murmured. "You got what you wanted. But I'm still here." As the moon rose over Beverly Hills, she finally felt the truth settle within her. Not peace, not forgiveness, but something quieter. Acceptance. She was Hope Forrester by birth, Hope Logan by choice, and somewhere in between the two names lay the truth of who she really was, a child born of love and lies, destined to carry both forever. In the bold and the beautiful, lineage is never just about blood. It's about the choices people make to claim or conceal their connections. And as Hope walked away from the grave, her silhouette framed by the silver light, she knew that every secret, every betrayal, had led her here, not to an ending, but to the beginning of her own story, one written in her own name. The news broke like a thunderclap through the gleaming halls of Forrester Creations, reverberating from design rooms to boardrooms, from interns' whispers to the corridors lined with portraits of the Forrester dynasty. Hope Logan is Stephanie Forrester's biological daughter. The words alone seemed impossible, an absurd contradiction to decades of rivalry, betrayal, and carefully curated family myths. Yet by mid-morning, the truth was no longer rumor but fact. The DNA report had been authenticated, cross-verified, and leaked by someone who knew exactly how to ignite chaos. By the time Eric Forrester arrived at the office, the atmosphere had already curdled. Assistants whispered behind hands, reporters swarmed the parking lot, and the board members huddled in private conversations that felt more like conspiracies. For once, the mighty patriarch, the man who had built this empire from sketches and silk, found himself trembling, not from age, but from guilt. He had treated Hope as an outsider for years, as Brooke's daughter, a Logan who had no true claim to the Forrester legacy. And now he realized, with an ache too heavy to articulate, that she was his granddaughter by blood. In the privacy of his office, Eric sat before a framed photograph of Stephanie. Her eyes, even in stillness, seemed to judge him, as they always had. He whispered, "You didn't tell me, did you? You couldn't." A bitter smile touched his lips. Stephanie had always been the keeper of secrets, the architect of manipulations dressed as love. And this, her final act, had managed to undo everything he thought he knew about his family. Across the hall, Ridge Forrester stood staring at the Los Angeles skyline, his reflection fractured against the glass. The irony of it all clawed at him. Hope, his stepson, his almost daughter, the living symbol of Brooke's endless intrusions into Forrester life, was now Stephanie's flesh and blood. She was the living bridge between the two women who had shaped, tormented, and defined him. "My God," he muttered, pressing a hand to his forehead. "What does this even make me to her?" It wasn't just biology that unsettled him, it was fate's cruelty. For years, Ridge had tried to reconcile the love and resentment he felt for both Brooke and his mother. Now those two legacies converged into one woman, Hope. A Logan by nurture, a Forrester by birth, she embodied the contradiction that had divided the family for decades. And now, the company they all fought to protect hung in the balance. When the board of Forrester Creations convened that afternoon, tension rippled through the room like static before a storm. Steffi, poised but pale, sat at the head of the long mahogany table, flanked by Ridge and Carter. Hope entered quietly, the air around her heavy with a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and envy. She didn't look like someone seeking power. She looked like someone caught between two worlds. Yet everyone knew what her presence meant. Carter was the first to speak, his tone measured but strained. "We've received a formal inquiry from the legal department regarding the late Mrs. Forrester's will. There's a clause, one that was never relevant before now." He glanced toward Eric, who sat motionless at the far end. "It stipulates that any biologically verified descendant of Stephanie Douglas Forrester is entitled to inherit a portion of her personal shares that have remained dormant since her death." Gasps rippled through the room. Ridge straightened. "How many shares are we talking about?" Carter hesitated, then opened the folder in front of him. 25%. The silence that followed was suffocating. Steffi's chair creaked as she shifted, the calm mask slipping just enough for the fire in her eyes to show. "That can't be right. Those shares were redistributed years ago. I hold them now." "Not entirely," Carter said carefully. "You hold controlling shares of the active board, yes. But Stephanie retained a private allocation that reverted to the estate. Since there were no other biological heirs beyond her direct children, the matter was considered closed. Until now." Steffi's voice tightened. "You're saying those shares automatically transfer to Hope?" Hope's fingers trembled against the polished table. "I didn't ask for this." "But you have it," Steffi snapped. "Do you realize what this means? You could challenge my position as CEO." The words echoed like a gunshot. Eric rose slowly, his voice gravelly. "No one is challenging anyone."
"Not yet."
"We're a family, not a battlefield." But even he could hear the hollowness in his reassurance. The meeting dissolved into murmurs, lawyers shuffling papers, publicists whispering about controlling the narrative. Steffi stormed out first, her heels striking the marble like drumbeats of war. Ridge followed her, torn between loyalty to his daughter and the impossible empathy he felt for Hope. For once, Brooke was silent, watching from the corner of the room as the world she'd built on ambition and romance began to crumble again. That night, the house on Maple Drive felt like a mausoleum. Brooke sat alone by the fireplace when Hope entered, her face pale from exhaustion. Neither spoke at first. The only sound was the steady crackle of burning wood. "They know," Hope said finally. Brooke nodded, her eyes glassy. "I figured as much. Steffi hates me." "She's scared," Brooke whispered. "That's what Forrester women do when they feel cornered, they fight." Hope sank into the sofa, the firelight flickering across her face. "I don't even know who I am anymore." I grew up thinking I was a Logan, then I fought to be accepted as part of the Foresters. And now, I find out I already was one, by blood. And somehow, that makes everything worse. Brooke reached for her hand, but Hope pulled away. You lied to me, Mom. My whole life. And now everyone's treating me like I'm some kind of threat just because of a piece of paper. Brooke's voice cracked. I lied because I wanted to protect you. I didn't want Stephanie to win. Hope turned to her, tears brimming. But she did win, didn't she? Even from the grave. She made sure we'd never escape her shadow. Meanwhile, at the Cliff House, Steffi paced in furious circles, her mind racing. Finn tried to calm her, but she was too far gone. Do you realize what's happening? She hissed. Hope's not just Brooke's daughter anymore. She's Stephanie's heir. That gives her leverage, control, and a claim to everything our family built. Finn's voice was calm but weary. She's not trying to take anything from you, Steffi. Steffi turned on him, her eyes blazing. You don't get it. The board already sees her differently. To them, she's not a Logan anymore. She's a Forester with shares, legacy, and blood. If they start backing her, she could take everything. Everything. Finn asked softly. Or just the part you're afraid to lose? Steffi froze, the question hitting deeper than she expected. Because the truth was, she wasn't afraid of losing her title or even her company. She was afraid of losing her identity. For so long, she had been the torchbearer of the Forester line, the woman who carried her grandmother's fire, who fought for her family's name. But now, Hope, her lifelong rival, was the true embodiment of that legacy. Stephanie's blood ran in Hope's veins, not hers. The next few days blurred into media frenzy. Gossip sites called it the Forester bloodline scandal. Analysts speculated about hostile takeovers, while fans of Forester Creations debated online about which woman should lead the company into its next era. Hope tried to avoid the cameras, but her face was everywhere, on magazine covers, talk shows, and industry headlines. Some saw her as a symbol of poetic justice, others as an interloper destined to fracture the empire from within. Inside Forester Creations, tension thickened. Meetings became battles, smiles became masks. When Hope attended a strategy session for the new spring line, she could feel every gaze on her. Steffi was there, immaculate as ever, but her words were edged with frost. Since you're now part of the Forester bloodline, she said evenly, perhaps you'd like to offer your insights on the Legacy Collection. Hope met her gaze. It's not about bloodlines, Steffi. It's about vision. And I think we both know what this company needs right now. Unity, not division. Steffi's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Unity only works when everyone knows their place. The room went silent. By the time the board convened again, the lines had been drawn. Half the members whispered about Hope's potential to revive the Forester legacy, to bring balance between the old guard and the new. The other half, led by Steffi, viewed her as a threat, a Logan in Forester clothing. The old war between the families had reignited, but this time, it was contained within the same bloodline. Eric watched helplessly as his grandchildren tore each other apart. You're both Foresters, he said one afternoon, his voice raw with age and sorrow. You're both part of me, part of her. Stephanie would be ashamed to see you fighting like this. Steffi looked away. With all due respect, Grandpa, she's the reason we're fighting. Eric had no reply. When the vote for CEO finally came, the tension in the room was palpable. Hope hadn't intended to challenge Steffi, but the board insisted on a formal review. Protocol, they said. Her newfound shares gave her legal standing to run. The results came down to a single swing vote, Ridge's. He looked from one daughter to the other. Steffi, fierce and loyal, the mirror of his mother's strength. Hope, wounded yet resolute, the unexpected embodiment of both women he'd ever loved. The decision felt less like business and more like divine punishment. You're both extraordinary, he said quietly. But this company isn't just fabric and profits. It's family. And I'm tired of watching this family bleed. He abstained. The vote ended in a deadlock, forcing an interim co-leadership arrangement. Steffi and Hope, two women born from opposite worlds, now bound by the same surname, the same inheritance, the same impossible legacy. In the weeks that followed, the building itself seemed to hum with the tension between them. They smiled for the cameras, posed side by side at charity events, but behind every shared glance lay 1,000 unspoken words. Hope worked tirelessly, determined to prove she belonged, not because of a DNA test, but because of her ideas. Steffi countered with precision, tightening control where she could, protecting the empire her grandmother had built. Yet, despite their rivalry, something began to shift. Late nights in the design room turned into cautious collaborations. Old wounds reopened, but sometimes, amid the arguments, they found a strange understanding. Hope began to see flashes of Stephanie in herself, the discipline, the pride, the fierce sense of purpose. And Steffi began to glimpse the part of Hope that wasn't Brooke's daughter at all, but her grandmother's heir, a woman who would fight for family, even when that fight broke her heart. One evening, long after the others had left, Hope stood alone in Stephanie's old office, the one preserved like a shrine. She touched the photo on the desk, whispering, "You built this world, and now I have to live in it." In the doorway, Steffi appeared, silent for a moment before saying softly, "Maybe we both do." The two women exchanged a look, not of hatred this time, but of recognition. For all their differences, for all the pain and rivalry, they shared the same inheritance, the burden of a legacy written in silk, pride, and blood. Outside, the Forrester building shimmered in the fading light, the city below alive with ambition and betrayal. Inside, two granddaughters of Stephanie Forrester, one by birth, one by spirit, stood on opposite sides of the same empire, bound by destiny and divided by choice. And as the night deepened, both knew that the battle for Forrester Creations had only just begun, not as enemies, but as reflections of the same indomitable woman whose shadow would never truly
Oh.